Am I correct that the substitute language that was provided to us this morning included a provision that was not in the underlying bill that would now allow municipalities to, by charter or ordinance, adopt ranked choice voting through you?
Through you, yes. And that was a recommendation of the governor's working group. It wasn't in the underlying bill because we had challenges trying to figure out how allowing that pilot for municipalities to be available to all towns. So state statute towns that elect boards of selectmen, sometimes those elections are a little bit complicated where a person is running to be the first select person, but then they drop down to potentially be in a race for a seat on the board of select people. And so it took some time for us to come up with consensus language, which is what's before us today in the proposed substitute, to make sure that if we're going to allow municipalities to make their own choice to have ranked choice voting in their elections, that it wouldn't just be available to municipalities that have charters, but would also be available to towns that govern their elections and the operation of their town by state statute, often called state statute towns.
Thank you for that answer, Madam Chairman. For me, this is a pretty significant change to be making after the public hearing. You know, I mean, I engaged with folks during the public hearing who were making the very strong case for why this bill should be supported solely around the fact that it was only going to be for party primary and convention type activity and not for any general elections. I mean, I asked so many questions that had to do with what happens when this gets to general elections, and I was told over and over again, well, our bill is only about primaries. So all of your examples, Senator, don't mean anything because it's only about primaries. And I find that like a bait and switch, frankly, to have the bill now include municipal elections, which obviously can be multi-party elections. I expressed already some of my concerns with this, during that, dialogue that I had with some of the folks during the public hearing. And we've had legislation in the past, to create a study for this and that kind of thing. And so we've had some conversation about it. But I just got to say that, there's so many issues for me with ranked choice voting. The first and foremost one is the confusion issue. I think if I asked, I was going to do this as a joke, although I would have looked really bad if she was able to answer. But I was going to ask the chairman to name all of her prior opponents she's had since she's been in office.
Oh, I could do that very easily, Senator.
But there's people that are here that have served in office long enough, maybe not even that long, and probably couldn't name all the people that ran against them over time because it's hard to straighten out in your mind who all the different political players are on Earth. And, we're going to ask this of our constituents. We're going to tell them, your job now is to take the 6 people that are on the ballot and put them in order of preference. What if they don't even know who they are? And I don't know that the vast majority of voters, I mean, look, some of the advocates for this legislation have said, oh, yeah, well, I have faith that voters are smart enough. It's not about being smart. I have faith in the voters, too. It's how much effort people are going to put in to try and determine who is running, down a ballot. And the more candidates that end up on a particular ballot, the more confusing it gets. With this process, if used in a municipal election, Madam Chairman, will this allow significantly more people to run than under current circumstances where usually the parties field a certain number of candidates because of the size of the legislative body, the council, et cetera, through you?
To the good senator, I just want to clarify your question. Are you talking about if a municipality chose to have ranked choice voting? Is that the provision of the bill you're talking about? So,
yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So that provision of the bill only has to do with the chief elected official position. So ranked choice voting would be available in a municipality if they so choose to conduct their election using this process for their mayor, their first elect person. I'm not sure if there's any other title that's used for a chief elected official here in Connecticut, but those would be the offices. The chief elected official would be the offices that could be under an election using this system. There'd be no other. There would be no other municipal election that would be under this system. So it might, to answer the other part of the senator's question, it might provide that more candidates would step forward. You might see in a given community that chose to conduct their elections this way, you might see 7 or 8 candidates for mayor for first select person, whereas in the past you've only seen 2 or 3. That might be the result of it, but again, it would only be for that top job, the chief elected official position, not for other boards and commissions within that municipality.
Thank you for that answer, Madam Chairman. I could be wrong about this, but are there towns in Connecticut where the first selectman is effectively chosen by virtue of being the top vote getter for all of the selectmen in the race through you?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question, and I'll let LCO correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that all towns that use boards of select people are either state statute towns or they have charters that outline that they have a board of select people, and so there wouldn't be any change to those existing provisions.
So that's an affirmative. Okay, so I get it. So in my example,
so forgive me if I wasn't clear. So I think what you're thinking of is sometimes there are towns in our state that elect town councils, and the top vote getter is sometimes called mayor. I don't think there's any town in the state of Connecticut where they do something similar with a board of selectmen, and the top vote getter for the board of select people is called first select person.
That answers my question. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Well, that clears up a little bit anyway. And I see that the way this is being done in a somewhat limited process, where we're going to start with primaries, then we're going to start like a day later by adding in municipal leaders. By the time this gets to the floor of the Senate, are there going to be more people included?
Thank you. And can someone understand the perspective that's behind the question you just made? I would say that the language that's before us today is a product of the governor's working group on this issue, and I don't foresee it being expanded. It may be tweaked before it's debated fully on the Senate floor, but I don't see the use of this mechanism of voting being expanded beyond what's outlined here in this proposal today.
Yeah, thank you for that, Madam Chairman. Yeah, this is an interesting conversation, and it's an excellent thought. What's the word I'm looking for? Like experiment. Yes, a thought experiment. That's wonderful. That's exactly what I was looking for. For me, that's what ranked choice voting is. It's an excellent thought experiment. It is not ready to be the law in Connecticut. It's just not. I see how this has worked elsewhere in the country, and I don't think it's worked well. One of the number one concerns I have about it is something that's almost never mentioned, especially when we talk about all of the forms of voting that we have in the state, which is the potential for vote spoilage or people being disenfranchised. The way that people are not disenfranchised is when they show up in person to cast a ballot on election day. Their vote counts pretty clearly. They're scratched off a list, they're verified, and their vote counts. Anything else starts to get a little wonky. If you are a seemingly perfectly educated voter, but you decide that you're going to put your husband and wife's ballots in the same envelope to return them as absentees, they might get kicked out. You might be disenfranchised as a result because of a requirement in our statutes that's not widely known or understood by the average voter. And in this particular situation, I think that there is just the element of confusion is just so great. When you're a candidate for office currently, you kick and scratch and fight for every vote that you get. In ranked choice voting, everybody gets a vote. All 6 people get their name checked off on the list Maybe they get checked off as number 6 or number 5, but they get checked off as getting a vote in some way. And in some respects, if some people are filling out all 6 names on a ballot, for example, or 10 or 4, they're casting 10 votes or 4 votes. Whereas someone else might say, I want this candidate. I don't want anybody else. They are effectively being disenfranchised in that election. It was described over and over again that they're not through some clever word games, but they are. Because effectively they are not exercising a vote for second best. I thought one of the most telling parts of the public hearing is when Mr. Monty Frank, who was one of the strong advocates for RCV, told me, and I don't want to misquote him, but it was something along the lines of, we should be looking for people that are aiming for second place, because that's a better type of candidate. I just disagree. I don't think that we want second place candidates. Elections are like the simplest thing on earth. It's like even when you're a kid and you're trying to make a decision on almost anything with your friends, you vote on it. Hey, how many of us want to go to the movies instead of, down to the arcade? Well, okay, we vote on it. We raise our hands and it's over. It's understood. Whoever gets the most votes wins. This is some thought experiment gone awry and caught up in this. We're going to legitimize the madness. It's one of the mind-boggling things about politics, really, I got to tell you, is that if you have enough people repeating the same nonsense in unison, it becomes legitimate. It baffles the mind. But that's what ranked choice voting is for me. It is a way to get around the natural way of things, the reality that the person who gets the most votes is the winner. Anything else is just absurd. Madam Chairman, I asked during the public hearing, I asked one of the folks testifying about about a potential series of events. And that was a case where you had candidate 1 who had 49% of the vote, and candidate 2 only had 35% of the vote. That of course leaves us 16% over. And then the rest of the 4 candidates out of a total of 6 candidates split the balance of that 16% of the vote. Effectively, they could develop enough votes to push the 35% number 2 candidate over the top to win that election. And I just don't think that that's right. On what planet should the person who gets 35% beat somebody who gets 49%? Do you have a reaction to that, Madam Chairman?
Thank you, Senator. I, in fact, do. So let me just repeat your math. 49%, 35%, and 16% for the other 4 candidates?
Yes, ma'am.
So I actually think your proposition here provides a really compelling argument for ranked choice voting, because I find it really hard to believe that the people who voted for 3, 4, 5, and 6 would universally all support candidate 1, and not 1% of that 16% would support candidate 2, unless candidate 2 was so terrible in his or her conduct in that election that it turned off anybody who was supporting any other candidate. And the advocates for ranked choice voting have said over and over and over again that one of the main reasons they support this system is because they believe it changes the rhetoric, that it makes people conduct themselves a little bit differently in their elections, in that you're saying you're the better candidate, but you maybe don't demonize the other people you're running against in the same way that a lot of people do now. So to answer your question, Senator, I think it would be almost impossible for all 16% of those people to vote for the same candidate again, unless the conduct of that election was so distasteful to voters for the scenario that you're talking about to take place, where candidate 2 would be able to overcome the 49% of candidate 1.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. But the key word in your response is almost impossible. It's not impossible. And I don't think it's a just solution to suggest that because it's almost impossible, that it's okay to let someone who only gets 35% of the vote somehow prevail in an election against someone who got 49%. I just don't see that as a viable voting system on any level. I'd also throw out there that, you know, the immediate desire to go to someone's behavior, it discounts much more likely things that are going to happen in elections. Suppose one candidate is of one political party and the other 5 candidates are all from the other political party. In that situation, you can easily see how the other 4 candidates might have all thrown their support behind the second, the number 2 candidate with 35%. And what's even more sinister, Madam Chairman, is not the innocent example I'm giving you where it just happens that way. I think what RCV does, beyond being really confused voting, which is what I believe RCV actually stands for, it can allow people to play silly games. You can stack voter candidates. You can say, well, you know what? We want Bob to win, but you know what? I think we should all put our names in the ring, and we'll just tell everybody to put us as their second place option. And you can maybe find a way to eke out a victory by manipulating the campaign and the election in that way. If you had enough willing participants to put themselves in as candidates. All of this is just silliness in my view. Every 5-year-old kid knows whoever gets the most gets the most votes wins. Everybody knows that. Anything else is just trying to contort yourself into some other strange worldview. And if the objective is things like, oh, well, we want better behavior from candidates, well, you can't do anything about that, frankly, Madam Chairman. You know who has control of that? And rightfully so? The voters. The voters get to decide who they want for candidates. And if they vote for a majority based on somebody that doesn't have the best behavior, well, blame the voters. Because the voters decide who the candidates are. Not some game where we give people multiple ballots or multiple votes for different folks. If you're concerned about having candidates that are passionate and maybe create, I guess, strong feelings, for lack of a better term, in voters, then you got to beat that person. You got to get 51% of the vote to do it, in my view. You don't come up with some way to say, well, we're going to find a way to defeat this person who has a tremendous amount of extremely loyal support, so much that he'll get 49% of the vote. And those other people won't even want another candidate. They will only want that candidate. And you can get nobody that can come even close to that 49%. So the game is to go ahead and put together a series of other people to find a way to cobble together enough second-tier support. For me, this is not the way we should be managing our election system in the state. I'll go back to the fact that we have election problems. We got a lot of them. The Bridgeport stuff is in the news to this day, almost every day. I mean, I think this all really hit the front page of the papers just after the pandemic, if I'm correct. And yet, it's like every week goes by, there's a new entry in the saga of the diary of what's going on with the whole Bridgeport situation. And that's not the only election problem that we're faced with, but it is maybe the most glaring one. And yet, we've done nothing to fix it. There's been no policy passed to address it. If you want to say that we put cameras on drop boxes, that doesn't solve that problem, not even a little close. It just creates a whole other series of problems. Should have got rid of the drop boxes. Never should have had the drop boxes to begin with. The things that need to be done are to properly identify and make sure of the identity of voters through voter identification, through signature verification. We should not be enabling people that engage in ballot harvesting and sharing of and circulating of ballots, and by getting rid of the unsolicited mailing of ballots. And we should actually have real penalties. We should have real penalties for people that commit election crimes. Those are the things that need to be done and continue not to be. This right here is just going to make the situation worse. It's going to create more confusion. And I just don't think it's fair to do it to the residents of Connecticut. That's my number one reason for speaking on this bill right now is I am just concerned that if this bill passes, some people in this state are going to be forced to live under this kind of crazy scheme to elect people. And I don't approve. Thank you.